Okay, let's unpack this electric vehicle thing. The buzz around EVs is, well, it's everywhere, isn't it? And I know I've personally been thinking a lot about maybe making the switch. It just feels like there's so much information, so much noise to cut through to figure out, yeah, it's now really the time. So today we're doing a deep dive into EVs. We're looking specifically at things that might help you, our listener, if you're weighing up this big decision. Especially thinking about the situation here in Italy. We've got a whole stack of sources, economic stuff, market trends, environmental reports, real-world experiences too. The goal is to explore the good bits, the potential downsides, and what's coming next for electric cars.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is just how much data is out there now. It covers everything, from the day-to-day running costs, the environmental side, to the specific incentives we have here in Italy, and even how the battery tech itself is changing. It is a complex picture, no doubt, but
Yeah.
our mission today is basically to connect those dots for you, help you feel properly informed. And, speaking from experience, I made the leap myself a couple of years back. It's been a really insightful journey, I have to say.
Oh, that's perfect then, because I'm really interested in whether it is genuinely, cheaper in the long run. And also, is the tech really mature enough, like for everyone right now? So let's maybe start with the big picture. For someone like me, still kind of on the fence, what are the main advantages? What are the big wins with EVs?
Okay, let's start there. The biggest immediate promise, I'd say, is on the economic side. Think about your fuel bill being slashed significantly and your maintenance worries dramatically reduced. Even though the upfront cost, the purchase price, can often be higher, it's those long-term running costs where EVs really start to shine.
Okay, so we're talking about the day-to-day expenses. How big are those savings, really?
Absolutely. Let's look at some numbers. US data suggests electricity costs are around, what, 2.5 cents per kilometer on average? But here in Italy, where petrol is taxed quite heavily, the difference, it's even more stark. An EV can easily be 3, maybe 4 times cheaper to run than a petrol car. For instance, Enel did an assessment this year, 2024. They found driving 100 kilometers in an EV costs about €5. Compare that to around €11 for a typical petrol car. Well, it's more than double, isn't it?
Wow, okay, €5 versus 11. That's a really substantial difference just for the energy. Does that figure mostly assume you're charging at home, or does it mix in public charging too?
Right. That specific Enel figure likely blends things a bit, but yeah, home charging is consistently the cheapest way to do it.
Okay.
We can definitely get more into charging nuances later. But beyond fuel, the maintenance savings, that's another huge factor. Think about a normal petrol or diesel car, an ICE vehicle. They're incredibly complex machines, hundreds of moving parts. You've got regular oil changes, filter replacements, brake checks and replacements. EVs, on the other hand, have a much, much simpler drivetrain, basically a rotor, a stator, and a casing. So, no oil changes, no fuel filters, and even your brakes wear out slower because of regenerative braking.
Ah, regenerative braking. That's a thing where the motor slows the car and puts energy back in the battery, right? So you're not just saving on brake pads, you're actually like boosting your range a tiny bit.
Precisely. It captures energy that would otherwise be lost as heat, really extends the life of your brake pads. Autoscat 24 actually did a study on this. They found an average saving of 42% on maintenance over 6 years for EVs compared to ICE cars. That worked out to something like 182% a year for the EV versus 314 for the petrol car. And for some premium models like the Jaguar I-Pace, the savings could be even higher, maybe up to 75%. Even for more common EVs like the Smart Fortwo EQ, Renault Zoe, or Teslas, the annual service costs tend to be consistently lower after the first main checkup. So yeah, the lack of all those traditional engine bits really does add up to significant long-term savings.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Those maintenance costs, they're a huge factor. And 42% average saving, that's really compelling. I kind of always assumed advanced tech meant higher repair bills down the line. So that's a nice surprise.
Exactly. And for you listening here in Italy, there's even more. There's a whole package of financial perks from the government and locally. We've got substantial fiscal benefits, incentives. Take the EcoBonus Auto 2025. It offers a maximum contribution, 13,750. That's if you scrap an old polluting car like a Euro 0 to 2. And you need an IC, that's the income indicator, under $30,000. And it's for buying a pure electric car, a BEV, priced under $35,000 before VAT. But even if you don't scrap an old car, or if you're looking at a plug-in hybrid, a PHEV, there are still decent incentives. And the nice thing is the discount is applied directly by the dealer, so it simplifies the whole process, which is a real plus.
So the government is actively trying to make it easier and cheaper to buy an EV right now.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. There's the PNRR, Italy's big recovery plan. That offers extra incentives, potentially up to €20,000, targeted at micro enterprises in certain cities, again, usually linked to scrapping an older vehicle. Then, on top of these national schemes, you get these really valuable local benefits. For example, you're exempt from road tax for 5 years across Italy. In Lombardy, it's indefinite. And things like free parking in designated spots in cities like Milan, access to ZTLs, the limited traffic zones. Anyone who drives in a city knows what a game changer that is. No more circling for ages looking for parking, no worrying about ZTL fines. Honestly, my own driving in Milan, it's been transformed by those perks. It really adds to the convenience factor.
Free parking in Milan.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's a massive daily win. And the ZTL access is just brilliant. Okay, that's a pretty comprehensive package of financial pluses. But moving beyond the wallet and thinking bigger picture, what's it actually like to drive one? And what about the planet side of things?
All right, beyond the money, the environmental benefits are pretty clear and immediate. EVs have zero tailpipe emissions, none. That directly improves air quality, especially in cities. Huge public health benefit. They also mean less noise pollution. Cities become quieter, more pleasant places. You might notice newer EVs make a sort of subtle sound at low speeds. That's actually an EU rule just to alert pedestrians. It's quite interesting. And long term, this whole shift means reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, obviously. There was a State of European Transport report. It highlighted that an EV's entire life cycle uses maybe 20 liters of polluting material. An ICE car, over 12,000 liters. And this isn't just theoretical. In 2024 alone, they estimate EV adoption cut CO2 emissions in Europe by 20 million tons. That's a tangible difference.
20 million tons. That's incredible. A real measurable impact on air quality and CO2. But you often hear the argument about, where the electricity comes from, the dirty grid argument. How does that play into it? Does it cancel out the savings?
That's a really important point. And yeah, it absolutely matters. We should definitely circle back to that whole life cycle impact later. It's a key nuance. But the general consensus is, even with the current energy mix in most places, the overall life cycle emissions for an EV are still lower than for an equivalent petrol or diesel car. Now, let's talk driving experience, because for a lot of people, maybe even most people, this is just as important as the numbers, right? EVs offer instant torque. What that means is you press the accelerator, you get immediate power, smooth, responsive acceleration, and deceleration too. There's no gear shifting, no engine vibration, no roar, just this really quiet, almost silent ride.
That quietness, it sounds like a really fundamental shift from what we're used to. No engine rumble at all.
Exactly. That lack of noise and vibration makes commuting, or any driving really, much more relaxing. Plus, the battery pack, which is heavy, is usually mounted low down in the car's floor. That gives EVs a lower center of gravity, which generally means better handling, more stability. They feel really planted on the road. And that regenerative braking we mentioned, it doesn't just save your brakes. In many models, it allows for this kind of one-pedal driving. You basically control speed just with the accelerator in city driving, rarely needing the brake pedal. It's quite intuitive once you try it.
This really raises an important question, doesn't it? For many drivers, the actual feel of driving is just as vital as the specs. And EVs, well, they often deliver a really premium, smooth experience there. Oh, and safety-wise, studies consistently show EVs tend to perform very well in crash tests, often getting top ratings. And the fire risk, despite what you might sometimes hear, is generally lower than for petrol cars. That's down to robust battery protection and just simpler mechanics overall.
Okay, wow. That all sounds fantastic, actually. The economic side, the environmental pluses, and a better driving experience. It does paint a very compelling picture. But, every coin has two sides. What are some of the challenges, the things you, as a listener, really need to be aware of when you're considering an EV? Let's talk about the less glamorous bits.
That's a very fair point. And yeah, it's crucial we tackle these nuances head on. One key area is definitely charging, specifically the efficiency and the costs, which aren't always straightforward. When you charge an EV battery, there are always some energy losses. It's physics, usually around 10%, maybe up to 20%, especially if you're using very fast DC charging. So the energy you pay for isn't quite 100% of what ends up in your battery.
Right, okay. A bit like spilling fuel, but electric.
Yeah.
And what about the cost itself? I do hear a lot about public chargers being quite expensive sometimes.
You're absolutely right. The cost of charging can vary wildly. That's a significant factor. Charging at home, especially if you can get a dedicated electricity tariff for off-peak hours, that's by far the cheapest way. We're talking maybe, let's see, UK figures suggest as low as 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour, but public charging, especially rapid chargers on motorways, that can be considerably more expensive, sometimes 10 times more. Here in Italy, you might see public charging costs up to maybe 28.5 cents per kilowatt hours. In the UK, ultra-rapid charging can hit 81 pence per kilowatt hours. At those rates, it can sometimes feel less convenient and potentially even more expensive per mile than just filling up with petrol if you rely solely on public charging.
Okay, so it really pushes you towards having home charging sorted out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just plug and play anywhere if you want the best economics.
Exactly. That's why the stats show something like 92% of EV charging in the UK happens at home. It really highlights how important that home setup is for most owners. The solutions involve things like smart scheduling, charging overnight when rates are low, or using public charging subscriptions, maybe finding deals or credits. There are apps like Octopus Electroverse in Spain, for example, that try to aggregate networks and offer better rates. It just means you need to plan your charging a bit more. Rather than just reacting when the tank is low, it becomes a habit.
That makes sense. Okay, what about the big one for many people, the initial price tag, the acquisition cost? EVs are still generally seen as more expensive up front, aren't they?
They are, you're right. The purchase price is still, generally speaking, higher than for a comparable petrol or diesel car. However, that gap is definitely narrowing, and it's narrowing quite quickly. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, for example, they project that EVs could actually become cheaper to buy than ICE cars by 2030, which isn't that far away now. Closely linked to this is the battery itself, its lifespan, and its cost. The battery pack can be, up to half the initial cost of the whole car. The average battery life is generally estimated at around 10 years or maybe 150,000 kilometers. Often, that aligns pretty well with the typical lifespan people keep cars for anyway. Of course, you get these outlier stories, right? Like that guy, Hans-Jörg Gehman, with his Tesla Model S. He drove at 1.6 million kilometers, which is just incredible. But importantly, his car needed 2 battery replacements and 7 motor replacements during that time. It puts that kind of extreme mileage into perspective.
Wow, 1.6 million kilometers. That's amazing endurance for the car itself. But yeah, quite a few major replacements needed. What does that tell us about longevity for the average owner? Is a battery replacement like the end of the car's life financially?
It tells us the core vehicle structure can last a very long time. But key components, especially under heavy use, will eventually need replacing, just like any machine. For the average owner, though, a battery replacement isn't usually expected within the first, say, 8 to 10 years. And they typically come with pretty long warranties, often 8 years or 100,000 miles, something like that. But yes, outside of warranty, replacing a battery can be a very significant cost. And this leads us neatly into another complex area, resale value. Unlike petrol cars, where value is mostly about age and mileage, an EV's resale value is heavily dependent on the health of its battery, its remaining range, its ability to hold a charge.
Right, so if the battery's degraded significantly, the car's value just plummets.
Precisely. And the challenge here is that accurately diagnosing battery health isn't always easy or reliable. Getting independent assessments can be difficult. This creates uncertainty in the used market, which can worry buyers. Some studies, like one in the US by a company called Recurrent, suggested used EVs were depreciating faster than ICE cars recently, maybe down 32% year on year compared to just 7% for ICE. That said, it varies a lot by model. Premium brands like Tesla often hold their value better, sometimes performing similarly to equivalent petrol cars after, say, 3 to 8 years. And naturally, as new EV prices keep falling, that puts pressure on the value of older used models. That's logical. Oh, and repair costs in general, not just batteries. They also tend to be a bit higher for EVs currently. Often requires specialized technicians, equipment, and sometimes takes longer.
That all makes sense. It definitely sounds like there are some real trade-offs to weigh up, especially thinking about the used market and long-term ownership costs beyond just fuel and basic maintenance. How about the overall environmental picture? We talked about zero tailpipe emissions, which is great. But what about manufacturing? And the electricity grid you mentioned earlier, is it truly green from start to finish?
That's such a critical question, and yeah, you need to look at the whole life cycle. While driving emissions are zero, the production phase, especially making the battery, does have a significant carbon footprint. Manufacturing a lithium-ion battery can generate something like 150 to 200 kilograms of CO2 equivalent for every kilowatt hour of capacity. So for a big 100 kilowatt-hour battery, like in a long-range EV, that's maybe 15 to 20 tons of CO2 just to produce the battery itself. This means it can take a few years of driving the EV. The estimates vary, maybe 1 year, maybe up to 5, depending heavily on how clean your electricity grid is and what kind of car it replaces, just to pay back that initial manufacturing emission compared to an ICE car.
Okay, so the clean part, the net benefit, only really starts after you've driven it for a certain amount of time.
Exactly. It's like a deferred environmental benefit. You pay the carbon cost upfront in manufacturing. EVs also need more critical raw materials, about 4 to 6 times more than a petrol car, roughly 200 kilograms per EV. Things like graphite, copper, cobalt, nickel, lithium.
Hmm.
The mining and processing of these materials also have their own environmental and sometimes social costs, which is a whole other important discussion. And you hit the nail on the head earlier. The source of the electricity is crucial. Here in Italy, for example, around 65% of our electricity still comes from non-renewable sources, fossil fuels mostly. However, even taking that into account, looking at the global picture and the full life cycle, the general scientific consensus is that EVs are still advantageous compared to ICE vehicles in terms of overall environmental impact, and battery recycling technology is improving, although it's still complex and costly. But reuse, like using old car batteries for grid storage, that's also an emerging and promising solution for their second life.
So putting it all together, what does this really mean for you listening, thinking about buying one? It sounds like there are quite significant trade-offs. Upfront cost versus long-term savings, tailpipe emissions versus manufacturing impact. It's definitely not as simple as just zero emissions means totally green.
It's absolutely a balance. You're weighing today's cost and maybe some convenience factors like charging planning against potentially huge long-term savings, doing something positive for local air quality, that great driving experience, and navigating this rapidly changing tech landscape.
Which brings me back to the big question I'm wrestling with. Given all these pros and cons and how fast things are moving, is it better to wait maybe a few more years before buying an electric car? Or is it a case of the sooner the better? The market feels like it's evolving incredibly quickly.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And what's fascinating, and maybe a bit daunting, is just how rapid that pace of change is right now. We are definitely in a period of intense innovation and competition in the EV space. Take battery prices. They dropped remarkably by about 20% in 2024 alone. That's the biggest single-year drop since way back in 2017. It's being driven mostly by lower prices for key minerals like lithium and also just fierce competition, especially coming out of China.
20% drop in 1 year. That's huge. That must be good news for future buyers, but does that kind of rapid price drop make the depreciation issue for existing EVs even worse?
It's a valid point, and yes, rapid drops in new car prices inevitably put downward pressure on the used market. It's a double-edged sword. But that dynamic is also what's helping to accelerate adoption overall, which in turn fuels more investment, more innovation. It becomes a kind of virtuous cycle.
Wow.
And speaking of innovation, the tech advancements are just accelerating like crazy. We're seeing really exciting progress in things like sodium-ion batteries. You mentioned tech maturity earlier. Well, this is a potential game changer. They could be cheaper, they perform better in the cold, and crucially, they reduce our reliance on lithium, which addresses some of those raw material concerns. CATL, one of the biggest battery makers, just announced their second-generation sodium-ion cell. BYD is investing heavily, too. It's becoming serious.
Sodium ion. Okay, that sounds really promising.
Yeah.
What about the one we always hear about is the sort of holy grail solid-state batteries? Are they still just lab experiments or are they getting closer?
Solid-state batteries are definitely moving closer to commercial reality, much closer than they were even a couple of years ago. Big players like Toyota and also BYD again, they're targeting mass production around 2027, 2028, so just a few years away. These promise higher energy density, which means more range from the same size battery, potentially faster charging, and improved safety because they don't use flammable liquid electrolytes. Now, initial volumes will probably be limited, maybe for premium models first, but they represent a really significant potential leap forward. There's also work on lithium-sulfur batteries, which offer very high energy potential and use less problematic materials, but they still have some technical hurdles to overcome for widespread use.
It really sounds like the R&D departments are firing on all cylinders, constantly pushing what's possible. What about the lithium-ion batteries we have now? Are they still getting better, or is all the focus on these new chemistries?
Oh no, absolutely. Existing lithium-ion tech is constantly improving too. It's not standing still at all. We're seeing advancements leading to things like super fast charging, getting significant range back in just minutes, batteries designed for longer lifespans with less degradation over time. Also, big improvements in manufacturing efficiency using AI for things like spotting tiny defects in battery cells as they're made, which helps bring costs down and improve quality in these huge gigafactories producing millions of cells. And like we touched on, the recycling and reuse side is also advancing, tackling that end-of-life core. And even if the actual supply of old batteries to recycle is still relatively small right now.
That is a lot of innovation happening all at once. What about the production capacity? Can the world actually build enough batteries and cars for this massive shift?
Well, global manufacturing capacity for batteries is scaling up incredibly fast. It was around 3 terawatt hours, or TWh, in 2024. Projections suggest it could hit 6.5 TWh by 2030. That's a massive expansion. Now, it's true that China currently dominates production. Maybe 80% of global battery cells are made there, and they have a near monopoly on processing many of the key components. But serious diversification efforts are underway. The US, for instance, has doubled its battery manufacturing capacity since 2022. Europe is growing significantly too, building its own gigafactories, although it has to be said, Asian manufacturers, particularly Chinese and South Korean companies, still have a lead in terms of scale and established expertise right now. So if we try to connect all this back to the original question, buying now versus waiting, it really depends on your specific needs and priorities. The benefits today, the cost savings, the driving experience, the environmental aspect, they're significant and real. The future definitely promises even more improvements, maybe lower prices, better tech, more chargers. But the core technology available right now, it's already robust, it works well.
It delivers a fantastic experience for many people. And I can certainly say, from my own experience driving an EV these past couple of years, it's been overwhelmingly positive. The technology feels mature, and honestly, it's just a great car to live with day to day.
Wow. Okay, that was a really thorough deep dive into the world of electric vehicles. Thank you. We've really unpacked a lot there, from the nitty-gritty of running costs and those Italian incentives, right through to the bigger environmental picture and the super exciting future of battery tech. Hopefully this gives you, our listener, a much clearer picture and helps you feel more confident in making whatever decision is right for you about potentially joining the electric revolution.
And perhaps it leaves you with an important question to ponder. As this technology keeps advancing so rapidly and government policies increasingly push towards sustainable transport, how might your ideal car, your ideal way of getting around, evolve in just the next few years? What factors will ultimately tip the scales for your personal choice?
A great question to mull over. Thank you again for joining us on the deep dive. If you found this deep dive interesting, if it was helpful, please do give us a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. We promise we've got even more intriguing deep dives coming your way.